Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 213 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. A board game about podcasts and...
So rude.
Sorry, how's that work again, Callan?
A
podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with your friends, even when you're losing. We welcome back, as you may have just heard, the Red Tank to this week's episode. Hello.
Hello, I am back from Chicago, land of the cold and pizza.
Chi-Town, the Windy City.
Very cold there. I much prefer California.
Yeah, well, California continues to have the hottest weather imaginable.
Speaking of California, 213 is the area code for LA. At least it was the entire area code for LA when I was growing up. So 213 for me says LA. And the Super Bowl was just in LA, so even more. And the halftime show was very LA focused, so it's a very LA episode to me.
Oh, there we go. 213, the most LA we've ever been. That, of course, is the voice of Mark, the Green Tank. Hello, both of you.
Hey.
This week on the show, we're going to be talking about approachability in board games. What makes a board game approachable, which is to say, what are the things that can help out with making it easy to learn, easy to pick up. We'll be talking about all of that later in the episode. Before that, let's talk about the games that we've been playing. And this week, we're going to be getting the rundown on Shinkansen 0K by Callan. I'll be telling us about Project L, and Mark will be telling us about Boonlake. Callan, take us to Japan.
So it may come as no surprise to longtime listeners that I was excited in checking out Shinkansen 0K. This is a game about the Olympics in 1960s in Tokyo, Japan. Specifically, you are building the Shinkansen train railway to get ready for the Olympics, and that takes place in exactly 5 years, so you have 5 rounds with which to try to score the most victory points. The game is a small box game from Ludonova, and one that we saw at PAX Unplugged and we're super eager to get our hands on. It looks beautiful on the table. It has a smaller price point, which is also really cool. And in the game, you are taking a small series of actions over the course of an entire game. Each round has a variable amount of actions that you will take that is dictated at the beginning of the game. So you'll see over the course of this game of Shinkansen 0K, I only have 14 actions in the whole game. And you will be jostling and fighting with your neighbors to build out the rail line in 12 different cities all across Japan. You will be building up your own bullet train and giving yourself unique powers to break the rules of the rest of the game. And you will also be investing in stations of 3 different colors. And at the end of the game, you'll score points based on which station is worth the most to the least. The main thrust and flow of the game is that a series of 5 cards will come out for your tableau. So these are additions to your bullet train. And then you will, in turn order, select those cards. And then the turn order will change as a result of whichever card is closest to the deck. You will then use your abilities for that round or year as you put that piece of the bullet train into your car. And so that'll give you abilities like it'll make it cheaper for you to prepare the grounds of one of the cities, or it'll make it cheaper for you to lay track, or it'll allow you to upgrade one of the station colors in relative value compared to the other stations. And in addition to that, each card will have a city affiliation attached to it, which is really intriguing because how you score at the end of the game is complicated and based on which cities you have chosen to invest in your train. So at the end of the game, the 3 station colors, which are black, gold, and white, one will score 6 points, one will score 3 points, and one will score 1 point. So if in Nagoya has had the grounds prepared, if Nagoya has had track laid in it, and Nagoya has a gold station in it at the end of the game, you will score, and gold is in the first place, you will score 6 points for every Nagoya card that you have in your tableau. So you can double up, triple up, quadruple up, really go into Nagoya and hope that pays off. But if gold ends up being only worth 1 point, you're only going to score 1 point per Nagoya card that you have in that section of your tableau. This gets even more complicated because if you have not laid track in Nagoya, you actually score negative points for that section of the city. So there is a lot of negative investment happening where every time you take a card, you're like, am I going to get to a place where this will even score, or am I just picking up this card because I have to, because you do have to pick up a card every single year of the game. In addition to that, there is a little bit of area majority happening with these Olympic torches where you are competing over some other scoring. It's not important to super go into it, but again, the game is quite punishing in that if you don't lay your Olympic torches, -3 points per Olympic torch you don't put in. So it's one of those games that you explain it to people and they go, I'm not sure I get this. After one round, you're like, okay, I get this. And then as you get near the end of the game, you're like, the scoring here is not nice. It is not pleasant. It is a game about shared incentives. It is a game about positive player interaction. Okay, everybody's favorite kind of player interaction, positive. TLDR, Christina won the game, okay, because she leashed off Kellen and Neelan. Okay, I was building the city. I was building the railways in the 1s and the 2s and the 3s. Neelan's was up top near the 12s. And Christina's, yeah, I'm just going to go right in the middle here and take advantage of both of you. And she did take advantage of both of us and won our game of Shinkansen 0K. Neelan, what did you think of this game?
I thought it was fun. I thought like some of the systems felt really clever, like specifically the way that you're forced to acquire cards. So like you mentioned, you have to take a card every round, but the way that works is where you place your train, which card you're picking up, also determines the turn order, which is a reward in and of itself because each spot in the turn order has a specific reward associated with it. And also, obviously, who gets to take actions first, which can be crucial at any given time. So there's this balancing act of, okay, I really want this Kyoto card, but that means I have to come in third place in turn order if I want to take it, or vice versa. And that's to say nothing of the fact that each of these cards has a specific action or a benefit that you may want. So there are multiple layers of incentives that you have to work through to figure out which card you have to take in that given round, which I thought was clever. I was surprised to find at the end of the game that we kind of had built up, I would say, about 2/3 of the infrastructure of the entire route, which kind of felt like I expected more would be unbuilt. Pretty much everything that we had collectively invested in had both a station and a railroad on it at the end of the game, which surprised me a little bit.
I think that's probably has to do with the system that generates how many actions that you have in each round of the game, because it's quite variable where it's setting the amount of actions you have, it's setting an available action for that round, and the cost and victory points associated with laying track. So that could go up and down quite drastically. And so we actually had in the first round of the game, at the end of it, we all just got 4 yen. We all just got money. So it pushed more money into the system. I think that a lot of what is my game plan for this game of Shinkansen 0K would come from looking at those 5 cards in the upfront and going, okay, this is going to be a very poor game for Y, ergo I need to be focused on this. But I agree with you. I was surprised at how adept we were at building out everything that mattered to us. And I think it may have had to do also with you being in the sort of 6 through 10 category instead of being in the 9 through 12 with me at the beginning and Christina in the middle. But I do want to double down on what you said. When you select a card, you're actually choosing also which color of station goes up in value. And then in addition to that, where in your tableau each city is located matters, because you want them in ascending order, and there's only one action space on the board that allows you to rearrange that order, so you actually score a lot of points at the end of the game if you have your bullet train in line with 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So there is a lot that you're having to sift through, and those early turns when there's only 2 actions per turn go quite fast, and then it slows down pretty dramatically near the end when you have 4 or 5 actions in the last 2 rounds.
But that said, for a game that takes an hour to play and felt like it had some really solid decisions in it with a lot of competing incentives, I think that's a great size and a great length to be at in a game that feels as good as this one did.
You mentioned it's a small box game, and it seems like it's not so big of a footprint. It seems like a fairly small production.
I think that it is a little bitty to set up for me. I was getting a little bit of, what is that game? Bruxelles? I can never say that city. We played the card game version of it.
Yeah, just Brussels.
Brussels, but the card game one where we're like, it's a small box and then you get it all out and you're like, oh, this is here and that is there and this is here. And you're like, what?
Right.
But at the end of it, I'm very excited about this. I think this one has legs. I think that Mark, I think you will really enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you might say, this doesn't have the level of interaction I'm looking for. It almost presents a little bit more like it's there than it's actually being there.
Right.
But on a scale of Euro game to 18XX or Splendor, like it is sitting comfortably somewhere in the middle of that. That feels nice.
Yeah.
That feels like something that we could all agree on collectively. And it's quite beautiful as well. Quite
Absolutely, yeah.
striking.
I'm looking at pictures now, and yeah, it is very striking.
So that is one that I am looking forward to playing more, Shinkansen 0K. Oh, and that was a review copy provided to us by Asmodee. So thank you for that.
Interesting. I didn't realize that this was a game based around Tokyo getting ready for the Olympics, which actually works. This is another tie-in with what's going on nowadays.
No one's watching the Olympics, Mark.
I'm watching the Olympics. And
That's not what the data says. The data says you're not watching. No one is watching the Olympics.
Definitely here for all of the curling, I'll tell you that much.
I love
The
curling.
Single best winter
Are you being
Olympic sport.
sarcastic?
No, I'm being 100% serious.
I love curling. Like once a year, I will fall down a curling rabbit hole. I just watch like a bunch of curling YouTube videos, like one after the
You
other.
only fall down once a year.
Only. That's right. That's right.
I would have expected more at your advanced age.
But real quick, speaking of the Olympics, I gotta say my favorite story. Have you been watching the Olympics at all, Neelan?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
Wait,
yeah.
who are you rooting for in the Olympics, Neelan?
Oh yeah.
Wait, South Africa...
I don't think I've seen a single South African
sorry,
athlete.
I get what you're
actually.
saying. Yeah, no, South Africa's not really big on the Winter Olympics. We
Yeah.
don't have much snow. So probably the UK.
Just my favorite story so far of the Winter Olympics, which I have been watching, is Erin Jackson, who is the American speed skater who just won the gold. The thing that blew me away is she has a video on YouTube or something of her first stepping on the ice, which was 6 years ago. She had not stepped on the ice until 6 years ago, and now she's the greatest speed skater in the world. It just blew me away. It's amazing. Amazing story.
Next, we finally have it. It's finally here. At long last.
No, don't even start.
A Splendor killer
No.
has arrived, everybody. This is Project L. Project L is a polyomino puzzle engine building game that I dare say is even more glorious to run through your fingers than the beautiful chips from Splendor. In Project L, you're going to start with just a couple of small little plastic polyomino tiles. One is just a single square piece that just takes up one square. One that's a 2x1 rectangle. And then from there, on your turn, you're going to take 3 actions. And those actions will be either upgrading one of those pieces. So you can turn a 2 into a 3 size shape. You can get one new square shape from the box if you wanted to. Another action you could take is to take one of these puzzles which exist in this array, which have these beautifully little recessed spaces where, as you can imagine, these polyomino tiles fit in order to fill up all of the white space in that particular puzzle. Another action would be to take one of your pieces and place it onto one of those puzzles. So the actions are like very bitty, but once you start to flow them together, start to feel very satisfying because you're nestling these little pieces into the little spaces, filling out these puzzles. And anytime you complete one of these puzzles, you get 2 rewards. Typically, some number of victory points at the end of the game and another piece into your supply. You also get back all of the pieces that filled up that puzzle. So you're just slowly accruing this bigger and bigger supply of bigger and bigger pieces. As you're upgrading pieces in order to fill out bigger and bigger puzzles, you're able to get more and more victory points and more pieces. So that's kind of where the engine building starts to come. You're starting from small beginnings, and through the course of completing these puzzles, you're able to complete bigger and bigger puzzles more and more effectively. The key to all of this is one action I haven't mentioned yet, which is just an advanced version of the placing action called the master action. You can only do this once per turn, but if you're able to, you're going to take one piece per puzzle on your board and place one piece into each of those puzzles. So you can have up to 4 of these puzzles at any given time. So if you set this up just right, you have 4 puzzles, 4 pieces, and you place all of them into their perfect spots into each corresponding puzzle. As you can imagine, that is probably the most efficient action you could possibly do and something you want to be setting yourself up to do as often as possible. So the game is about working towards these little efficiencies, getting yourself the right combination of puzzles, the right combination of pieces that you can do this very regularly. The game lasts about 10 rounds, and whoever has the most victory points in terms of completed puzzles wins the game. There are a couple of twists onto this, especially if you have the complete box as I do, which has a couple of other expansions you can throw into the mix. But otherwise,
you have the Project L Ghost Piece expansion.
I do have the
Project L Ambassador Pack expansion.
I do have that,
and the Project L Finesse expansion.
I do have that,
and the Project L Finesse Ambassador Pack.
I have all of those things.
And the Project L Master Box.
I have all of that. Everything, every single one of those things you just said.
Wow, goody!
I mean, it's impressive stuff, but. The whole thing is...
What a life you live, Neelan.
I know, this rockstar life I lead. The whole thing is this impressive package. And I will say this, is one of the things that cannot be understated is how great the production of this thing is. These pieces are glossy plastic and bright colors. The boards, the puzzle boards, are these double thick cardboard that are recessed and have nice rounded edges to everything. The graphic design on everything is super clean. It's just got a really nice aesthetic to it all. It looks really beautiful. And I think that's a lot just to help with kind of the presentation, the tactility, that sort of table presence, which is something that I like a lot in my board games. The game itself is super solid, but it is so specifically up my alley. And it's one of those things where as I was taking it and sharing it with Callan and Christina, I knew in the back of my mind that this wasn't going to be a game that, for example, that Callan would love. Like, it's so specifically, I love polyomino games, I love little engine builders, and it just tickles both of those things really nicely. But the game itself is just so simple, and I find so rewarding over the course of it. It's just a constant exercising, filling out puzzles, getting more pieces to fill out more puzzles with. That's kind of all I have to say about Project L. Callan, what do you think about it?
Okay, I'm of two minds. I think that when we started the game, when Neelan got it out, I was like, wow, this production is insane. You know, we've talking game trays for your game trays, and we had a game tray, and Neelan had a game tray. Everyone got their own game tray for whatever reason. And, you know, we got about a quarter of the way through, and I literally, in my mind, was like, what? Like, this could be a Splendor killer. This could be it. Like, I could be witnessing history right here, right now.
You could be watching the murder of Splendor before your eyes.
Yeah, and I was like, could it be called Project L? This black box with just a giant-ass L on it could beat Splendor? And by the end of it, I no longer felt that way. And to be clear, I just want to say this up front, I won the game, so that is not the reason, because I do not have the spatial recognition of Neelan, but I still managed to outmaneuver him. I would say that was my cunning, because it wasn't my spatial recognition. As we've discussed, it's not good. I would say that the Finesse expansion, I do not like. And I actually didn't know it was an expansion until now. But that is a specific part of it. It's good. This is good. This is rock solid. It's too expensive. I question why anyone would have kickstarted the whole thing, and I enjoyed playing it, and I would play it again. And I think that it would be smart to bring out with non-gamers, because it's do your own little puzzle and have a good time. It does not replace Splendor, dear God. And yes, we did have an incident where the game was unfair to me, and I still managed to overcome that and win.
Shout out if this sounds familiar. One turn into the game, Kellen was complaining that he was definitely going to lose because of how unfair the game was.
It did not
ended up winning.
I have never heard of that ever happening ever in my entire life. Not
so
even one time. You're saying
so
Kellen
misconstrued.
Did this.
Misconstrued.
Wow.
When engine builders, Mark,
yeah,
just like someone gets ahead in an engine builder,
right?
It scales.
It's game over. Yeah, it's game over.
No. It's like literally it has no mechanism. It's like Neelan completed on his first turn, and by the time it got to me, the array had jack in it that was helpful to start that first turn.
Right.
And I was like, did we miss a rule or something? Like that's what it felt like. And then by the mid game, I was comparing my stack of completed objectives to Neelan, and I was like, he was 2 ahead the whole game because of that turn.
Yeah.
And so again, the aforementioned cunning was the only way I got around that.
Yeah, no, I understand that. That makes sense.
Okay, great. As long as you get it, I don't expect anyone else to, but you, Mark.
I'm sure the game is flawed inherently, but it was only your unique exceptional skills that was able to balance it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Now that we've gotten that out the way, I will say, and I do wonder this actually, Calvin, like it may have been a mistake to present the game with the Finesse expansion right off the bat. I do think that there is a purity to the base game that is pretty solid all on its own, and sounds like it may have been closer to what you were looking for. Not to say that like entirely absolves any other issues with it that the game that you might have had.
Look, if I had this, I would not get rid of it. And that sounds like very faint praise, but I get rid of so many games. Like, literally, it's in and it's gone. If I had this, I would keep it.
Why?
Like,
Out of curiosity.
It presents so well.
Yeah.
And on your turn, you're just like playing Tetris, and a little bit of that splendor. It's like, oh, if I get that one, I'm going to get a bigger piece.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to get the L shape, and that L shape never gets taken away from you. And so then you use that L shape to get another shape, and it just has that, like, you're amassing a collection of literal toys to build more toys.
Yeah.
Which is great. And the graphic design is like 11 out of 10. It's very pretty.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, I like this fine. I think the production does go a long way. I do think this is a game where I think if the production was cut down a couple notches, it would lower the experience exponentially. And I'm not super into polyomino games, and I don't think I would consider this one of my favorite, even of the genre that I'm not a big fan of. But yeah, I think in terms of presentation, in terms of being able to teach this to people who are maybe not super into gaming, it's very palatable, very easy to do.
Yeah, I think one small minor point which is worth reiterating is it's easy to look at the double thick recessed boards and think that's extravagant, but this game, in my opinion, doesn't work if those are flat cardboard pieces that you're just nestling the things on top of loosey-goosey. It's the fact that everything just locks cleanly together onto those boards is like half of the appeal of the tactility in it.
Yeah.
Some would say it increases the approachability.
It may do. We may mention that later in the episode.
Some may say. No, I already said it. So
but yeah, that is Project L. I think Kellen summed up my feelings on it exactly. It is a game that I plan on keeping indefinitely. Is a perfect, approachable family game that I enjoy playing, and I don't see myself ever not enjoying playing. It's just so perfectly up my alley for the sorts of little puzzles I enjoy in this type of board game. And if that sounds like you, I think you would enjoy it too. That is Project L.
A game that Neelan and I got a chance to play while I was in LA was Boonlake. This is the latest from Mr. Pfister. In Boonlake, what you are doing is you are settling the long-forgotten region of Boonlake, which was apparently inhabited by humans long ago. I don't know how that works, but that's what you're trying to do in Boonlake. The way that play works is every turn consists of 3 phases. And this is sort of an interesting way to do action selection. You'll have this shared board, which contains the 7 actions, each on their own strip, stacked one on top of the other. And on your turn, when you're the active player, you choose one of the strips. The strips at the top will allow you to move your boat the most if you want, and I'll a little more about that later. And the strips at the bottom, in addition to being the ones that allow you to move the boat the least, also can require a cost that you have to pay in order to take the actions. So you'll select one of the strips, you'll take the action, and then for all of the strips, all of these actions that you can select, you'll take the action, and then all of your opponents will then follow in a sort of a related action, which you can also follow as well. So if I take the action to, for example, settle, I will do the main action, and then I will, along with my opponents, do the follow action as well. So you get a bonus not only of having a unique action, but you also get the bonus of doing the same action everybody else is doing. So you'll remove the strip, you'll take the action, and then you'll move your boat, again, up to the number that was associated with where that strip was on the board. So again, if they're at the top of the board, you get to move up to 4 spaces. At the bottom of the board, I think it's 1 or 2 spaces. What that does is you're moving your boat along this path, and this is sort of reminiscent of Great Western Trail and Maracaibo, where you're moving your boat, which allows you to gain resources depending on where you land on the board. But in addition, it acts as a timer of the game. So once the first boat crosses a certain threshold, there will be an intermittent scoring, and then the next threshold will be another intermittent scoring, and then finally, at the end of the game, once a boat gets to the end, that will trigger the end of the game. So a timer as well as a way to get more resources. And then finally, after you've done all this, you're going to replace the strip at the bottom of the stack, therefore making it more expensive, less appealing for the next player to take. And it also discourages the same action being taken multiple times. What the actions are amount to settling this map. So this is a map of Boonlake, which consists of a number of different regions. And what you're doing are you're first exploring the land, which allow you to draw tiles and then place them on the board. That will determine what kind of buildings can be placed there, or if the place will be devoted to cattle, which is another sort of mechanism currency of the game, but will also gain you you resources when you place a tile. So the board is pre-printed with a number of resources that you could get depending on where you explore. You place a tile on the board, you'll get the resources. And then once those tiles have been placed out, you can again place cattle, which is a way of scoring, or you can start building buildings. So the buildings give you one of two things. First of all, these tiles that come out, printed on them, in addition to a number of building spots you can build on or a patch of grass where you can house cattle, also will themselves give you bonuses when you build on them. So if you want to inhabit a spot, you can first put what are known as inhabitants. They're not workers. They look like cowboys. I feel like cowboys would be a more appealing term, but they're called the inhabitants. So you'll start by putting an inhabitant down. That can be further upgraded to a house, which can be upgraded to a settlement. And as you're placing these, you're getting these houses and these settlements from your personal board, and as you uncover these buildings, they will Terra Mystica style reveal income that you get upon every scoring. So, you may place a house out, it may reveal on your printed board, say 2 gold coins, and then once the intermittent scoring comes up, you'll get all the resources that you've uncovered on your own personal board. In addition to the resources that you uncover and the buildings you build, the hexes themselves have benefits you can get. So if you place on a certain area on the board, you may get an additional number of points, you may get additional card draw, you may get an increase to these income tracks. The income tracks are gold income and cards income. These are things that happen when you do the intermittent scoring. You'll get more gold and or more cards that you can draw. Speaking of the cards, the way those work are you will be getting these cards throughout the course of the game as part of these myriad of actions people can take. And a number of the actions that you can select will allow you to, at the cost printed on the card, build these buildings. So these are buildings that are on the card that you will keep in your tableau as you build them, that are irrespective of the physical buildings that you're placing on the board. These are not so much multi-purpose cards as you will get in Maracaibo and Great Western Trail. They're not that sort of multi-use, but there are a number of them. A number of different buildings you can build, and as you build them, they can give you, instant benefits. They can give you passive abilities. They can give you end game scoring, and it's a way to give yourself an asymmetric bent in the game where you build a number of buildings, knowing that they'll give you a number of points for the number of cattle you'll build. So you're okay. I'm going down the cattle path, or you get buildings that increase your card draw. So you're building an engine to draw a number of cards to potentially build more buildings, or you can build buildings that will give you a discount when it comes to building other buildings. In addition to this income that you get upon every intermittent scoring, there are also these goals that you will have selected at the beginning of the game. So at the beginning of the game, everybody will get the chance to select one of 2 goals that the players must reach at some point during the game. So I will select one of the goals, Neelan will select one, Kellen will select one, and then upon every intermittent scoring, you must have accomplished one of the goals. The goals are, for example, having presence in 2 of the 4 regions on the board. The goals can be achieving some level of income on the income tracks, like having achieved at least some level of income on the gold track, some level of income in the card track. And the interesting thing about that is that the later that you do an action, the more points it's worth, but also the higher the threshold is to accomplish that goal. So, for example, if I'm trying to do the goal of having presence in 2 areas. If I do it in the first round, I only get 1 point, but I only need, say, 1 person in one region and nobody in the other region. It's very easy to accomplish. If I wait until the 4th round, I'll get more points, but it'll be something where I need a number of pieces in each region. So that's an interesting aspect of the game. There's more to it. There's an interesting resource production aspect to it. And as a whole, sort of a dovetail off interesting comment, I think the game itself flows really well. It's a game where a lot of times you feel like you need something. You feel like you're a couple gold short here, and you wish you had a couple more inhabitants, which inhabitants are like currency when it comes to upgrading your buildings. You feel a little short, but then almost immediately after, you'll take an action or you'll do some exploring and you'll place a tile on the board, which will give you resources. And there's a lot of these like little hits of pleasure where you're getting a number of resources, or you're getting a number of things.
Oh, hits of pleasure.
Yeah, I saw Kellen's eyebrows raised when I mentioned hits of pleasure. So there's a lot of these little like endorphin hits where you're like, oh, I get to place this and I get another thing. Or I'm building my building here and I get some resources. Or this card, I get a bunch of cards and they afford me a number of different options. These buildings like they built in my tableau. And the game feels really good. You always get these, again, these little hits of pleasure where you're like, oh, good, feel good, build this building, it all feels good. The issue I had with the game was that by the end of it, you feel like you've accomplished a ton. Like, you look at how far you are on the goal track, and you're close to maxing that out, and you're close to maxing out your card income track, and your personal board of these buildings that you're trying to uncover to get income is pretty much all uncovered. You've pretty much built all your buildings or cleared all your buildings off your board. And so, again, it's this anti-Marco Polo issue where the game feels like at the end of it, it was great, but I did everything. And I look at all my opponents, and they have very similar boards and very similar board states where, like, Nealon is maxed out and Kellen is maxed out, and all our boards are pretty much clear. And I just feel like I wish the game went one round less, because as I was playing it, when I got to the end, I thought to myself, like, this was great, but what would I do different next time? And if I went a different path, I feel like I would end up in the same spot, sort of. Like, if I took a more exploratory bent, or if I took a more buildings bent, I feel like there's enough time to, like, still get everything sort of done, and it really dampened my enthusiasm to play it again, even though, again, the experience was very smooth and very riddled with great little kicks of happiness. What did you think, Nealon, of Boonlake?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's worth calling out that I'm realizing is that the game length is technically variable. So I can imagine a scenario where someone is moving very far down that river and it ends sooner than you'd want it to. But I think the point that you're making still stands from my perspective, because it wasn't so much about getting everything I wanted to do done. Like, you know, I didn't achieve one of the goals I wanted to at some point during the game, but I felt like I saw everything. You know, like, I didn't feel like I had to narrow down on any specific parts of the game. Like you said, I managed to do a ton of different levers. I managed to have a ton of buildings out on the board, a ton of inhabitants out, a lot of cards. Like, it wasn't a matter of me necessarily getting to every single thing done that I wanted to by the time that you, like, inadvertently ended the game, which is, you know, one of the considerations is when you're going to move the boat to trigger the end. It just kind of felt like I wasn't excited to do it again because I don't know what I would have done differently. And I think that's, you mentioned that already, and I feel similarly. But that said, yeah, it was smooth. It was pleasant. I came away thinking that I wouldn't turn down a game of it, but I just would never advocate to, like, play it again.
That's literally
how I felt.
This is literally exactly what I was about to say. I would never turn it down. It felt really fun. It felt really satisfying. It's just I don't really have any interest in, like, really pursuing it further. Yeah. It's super pleasant, but how interesting it is, I'm not so sure.
Yeah. Good, but unexciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much better I would have thought the experience would have been if instead of 4 intermittent scorings or 4 scorings, there would have been 3.
Sure.
I just feel like if there was more, if I had, like, more to aim for, I would have been more excited to play it again, just because, again, how nice the experience was.
Yeah, Mr. Pfister didn't think about that, did he?
Did not.
3 rounds instead of 4.
Easy as that. That was an easy fix. Didn't even do it.
But, so, I'm of the opinion that all of these heavy Euro games are great, which is to say that you need to own, like, one of them. So, like, in my ideal collection, gun to our heads, Great Western Trail, Maracaibo, or this. It's Great Western Trail for this lot?
Great Western
Question
or
mark?
Maracaibo. I would say if you want a little heavier, Maracaibo, but I think it's definitely one of those for me above this.
Yeah, I've still not played Maracaibo, unfortunately, but yeah, this doesn't surpass Great Western Trail for me at all.
Cool. I would give it a go. If I get invited.
You were invited, but you were in Chi-Town.
That's true.
Yeah, you were having some deep dish.
I had a prior engagement.
You had some deep dish in Wrigley. What else can I say about
Okay,
Chicago?
deep dish is a scam. Okay?
Oh, God.
These people
These people
are saying that they're selling pizza, and they're selling you lasagna in a pizza.
What's wrong
form.
with that? Nothing wrong with that.
It's like, it goes up against my New York roots. These people are out of their minds.
Chicago was my favorite city. Of all the cities in the U.S. that I've ever visited, Chicago was my favorite. I really liked Chicago.
But that speaks nothing to the quality of their pizza.
I had their pizza. I had a pizza from the original Uno's. Is that what the thing is?
Yeah, Pizzeria Uno. Yeah, I had that.
I had that. Great. Loved it. Beautiful.
Yeah, okay. Well,
I shoveled
have you
that
been
in
to New York?
Good. I have been to New York. This was before I knew, though. So if this had been after I knew you, I would have been able to call my favorite New Yorker and say, hey, let me know where to go. I'm in your hometown, Kellen. Let me know where to go.
All right, we can move on.
And that is Boonlake by Alexander Pfister. The copy that we played was a review copy sent to us by Capstone.
So before we get on with the rest of the episode, one thing I'd like to bring up in the middle is this is actually our 4th anniversary episode, and while we're too cool to make a big deal about it, we would like to take the opportunity to ask for your feedback. How are we doing? So you can find a feedback form, which we would love for you to fill out at boardgamebarrage.com/feedback. And just by leaving us some feedback, not only will you be helping out with the future direction of the show, but you'd also stand a chance to get a board game of your choice sent to you from a small pool of games that we have to give away. And we'll have maybe 2 or 3 of those to give away. So please submit your feedback to boardgamebarrage.com/feedback. And please do make a point to have it actually be worthwhile feedback and not just, I would like to win a board game, for example. But you can do that, as a reminder, at boardgamebarrage.com/feedback. We hugely appreciate this. This is going to drive a lot about how we choose to prioritize going forward.
Suggestions. What do you want to see?
And you're not going to be throwing these suggestions in some sort of like abyss. The chances of your suggestions actually shaping the way the show is done are significant. We take your ideas and your feedback on board. We really would love to make the show appeal to our listeners.
And we will read every single one of them. One more time, that URL is boardgamebarrage.com/feedback. Thank you so much. We hugely appreciate it. Let's get into our feature topic this week, which is all about board game approachability. This is often described as board game accessibility, and we'll be talking about that too. The board game approachability we are choosing as a broader term to talk about how we onboard new players or people that aren't that familiar with board games with the hobby. So let's kick this off by just talking through a few examples. Some things that board games do that can help with approachability and accessibility. Mark, do you want to jump in here with anything that springs to the top of your head?
Yeah, I think one of the easiest ways to make a board game approachable is to make it as easy to play as possible. And what I'm thinking when I'm talking about that is games with minimal setup and rules overhead. So games that you can go from box to table quickly and that you can teach to people who, again, don't need to know board game jargon to immediately start playing. So games I'm thinking of are things like Skull, things like Ink and Gold, things like Deep Sea Adventure, which is maybe one step more complicated than the previous two, but things like that where it's just preferably small box, not a lot of little pieces, not a lot of things to set up. You can just pop it out and start going. And I don't think games with a lot of pieces or games with a longer setup necessarily mean that they're tougher to teach or are less approachable once you start getting into it. I just think that sometimes when you set up a game, regardless of how heavy or light it is, and you're putting out a lot of parts, that presentation alone can be a little daunting to people. It's the sort of thing where you find yourself saying, I know this looks like a lot, but don't worry, it's actually not as bad as it looks, sort of thing. So I think if it's not many rules and you can go from box to table quickly, I think that's a long ways to making it approachable.
There's something I really like in this direction that's happened a lot recently, which is, and I've mentioned this in the past, these games that have set up your first game like this, almost tutorials, like as you open them. Something about the
farm
way...
to table.
Yeah, exactly. Something about the way that like Jaws of the Lion, for example, takes a beast of a game like Gloomhaven. And to be clear, Jaws of the Lion is still an incredibly heavy game, but what they're attempting to do with that box is say, hey, set it up like this, and we'll take you through learning the game. Like, it's a slightly more accessible approach to just learning all of the rules that are Gloomhaven before game one. Kellen, you got something to jump in with?
Yeah, I think that this topic could go so many different directions, but I think a lot about approachable, and I'm using the board game word that we could debate, themes. And I was playing games with some non-gamers, and I think that there is something different about a game like Wavelength, where there is the smallest illusion of a theme, but that the presence of a theme would actually make it less approachable for that group that I was playing it with. So Wavelength does not have... It does in the rulebook technically say that it's like a spirit medium thing, but it's almost like it's a game show. Like it's a product. It's like closer to Uno than it is Mysterium, where you start a game with a group of non-gamers and you say, get this, guys, it's 1959 and we're getting ready for the Tokyo Olympics in 1964. 3/4 of the people who don't play board games would be like, I'm out. where with a game like Wavelength or even a game like Codenames has, again, this illusion of a theme, but it's so inoffensive as to be not a theme. The theme is cool. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. It's Project L is more accessible or approachable for non-gamers than Splendor, right? Because Splendor is like, who the is that guy on the cover? And I don't want him. He can go away. Is this weird fantasy shit, Kellen? Are there dragons, Kellen? No. Okay, Splendor is better than Project L, but this sort of clean graphic design. So I think that the thing that can make something approachable is literally just the theme with which it's presented.
Totally. I think, like, to your point, that works in both directions, right? Like, just over this weekend, I presented Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation to a non-gamer because they're a huge fan of Lord of the Rings.
Oh, how'd it go?
It went well. It went great. It's a lovely game. I think that she had a great time with it as well. It is...
Can you repeat after me, and then Mark, you edit this out, okay?
Yeah, got it.
Lord of the Rings: Confrontation.
Repeat after him, Nealon.
Oh, me or Mark? Sorry.
Yeah, no, you.
Lord of the Rings, The Confrontation.
Confrontation is better than War of the Ring.
Splendor.
Oh,
okay.
Splendor. Okay.
They just keep coming. So I think that does a lot in both directions. Like you said, like the wrong theme can alienate people and the right theme can like do a lot to make a game be more appealing on the outset. It's such an important balance to get right.
And then you can translate that to gamers or hobbyists or those of you who are likely listening to this podcast. There's a difference between a farming theme and a space theme. And you kind of know it when you see it. Like, for example, I think Race for the Galaxy is an interesting example, which we may get to for other reasons later in the podcast. But you look at it and you know what kind of game it is in some ways based on the artwork. And I say that in a positive way. It's like I look at a farming game, I look at Agricola, and like you're getting a certain type of experience. And if it wasn't a Euro game, hobbyists would have some sort of reaction to that. It's almost the expectation of what you pick up helps make it more approachable for those who might be interested in that specific flavor of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It acts as a shorthand to people who are experiencing the hobby to say, okay, I see the Clemens Franz artwork. I see the brown tiles. It's probably not going to be exactly what I think, but I have a general sense of like what the game style is, and you'll even have a sense of like maybe some of the rules or some of the mechanisms just by looking at the box or looking at the theme or the presentation.
I think on like a similar note, there are definitely a couple of games I can think of where small production choices do a lot to like aid either a feeling of toy factor, which is something I think makes people want to engage with something. And I think that's the thing that Project L, for example, has in buckets. Like, if I gave you the pieces for Project L and didn't tell you any of the rules, you'd be taking the puzzles and fitting them into those little shapes. Like, that, just by looking at the things in front of you, you're already halfway to knowing what to do with it. And that's something that production can deliver in spades. I've often talked about this in the context of something like Scythe, where the double recessed boards at the time especially felt like an extravagance. But at the start of the game, you know where to put all of your pieces on your board. And there's this very intuitive idea that you lift one out and it reveals something, and you put it into a corresponding slot and it covers something, which is all a huge part of that game's approachability. Like, it's a game that I think plays to a crowd that is not used to games as heavy as Scythe is, by virtue of a lot of the clever design choices it makes to make it more approachable.
I think that I'm thinking about iconography on cards, and specifically the sort of paradox of approachability as it relates to making multilingual versions of board games. So by function of making a card where it's got an icon instead of having English text on it, it makes it more able to be in more countries. But by the same token, it makes it less approachable to actually play the game. Put the text on the cards. Put the text on the cards. Put the text on the cards. I cannot stress enough how many games I'm like, yeah, I don't want to read the 7-page rules reference every time I get it out. And it's actually one of the reasons that, like, Trois, for example, in some ways, I prefer playing it on BGA, even though there's no takebacks. There's no takebacks in Trois on BGA. No takebacks. But you can hover and see the description of the thing. And so, in one sense, it is making the game more accessible, but in the other hand, it's making the actual playing of it. And so there is some separation or dichotomy there. We could even get into, for example, the cost of a board game being a huge factor in approachability, whereas the lower the cost, the more approachable that game is. And so there's in-game factors and out-of-game factors that sort of add up to more than you might think when you start thinking about this topic.
I think that's a great point, which kind of brings me to a follow-up question, which is when there are these barriers that do exist, for example, like price or something like iconography that's not immediately intuitive, what can we do as players of these games? What are the steps that we can take to make a game more approachable? For me, one of the things that comes to mind, for example, is like the way that we teach a game can absolutely aid in someone's understanding of it. Like whether you're teaching that in a way that is very, very logical, follows a natural flow, rather than just like a dump of all the rules. And one of the things I always find really odd, I get why this happens, but I always find it really odd that sometimes the worst way to learn a game is by reading the rule book. And there's a good reason for that a lot of the time, because the rule book needs to exist as a good reference primarily for checking on things. But I always find it surprising when a rule book operates both as a bad way to learn the game and a bad reference. That kind of feels to me as a fundamental failure on one of your most baseline methods of approachability. It was like, you know, how easy is it for me to be able to pick up this game, to be able to teach this game, and to be able to refer back to the rules later down the line? And I think a lot of that can be dissolved by the way that you prep for teaching that game to other players.
And that's FFG and leader games,
absolutely,
right? Both have. They do the double rule book thing a lot of times where there's the law of root versus the learn to play guide. I think there's a lot of small subtle things that you can do and that I do in the background that maybe other people don't notice. And they range from minorly offensive to maybe majorly offensive. But for example, I sit the player who I perceive to be the least experienced at board games in front of the board, so that it's in the right direction of the country or the map. Yeah. I don't know if this is a personal failing of mine, but oftentimes when I'm sitting upside down to the board where everything is upside down, I'm just like, I'm half as engaged because I can't read. I'm like, it's over that way, it's over which way. Similarly, I will prep factions for specific people. So if there's ever a game with Fighty, I will just hand that character to Christina because I know that she understands how Fighty in board games. And if there's a more complicated game, I will often set the turn order, even when it says to randomize it. So I will set the turn order so that I am going first as the teacher of the game. And then in a little bit of a reverse player order to who I perceive to be the least able to understand it, I will go, okay, I'm first, then this player, then obviously Mark will go last.
I was going to say, I was wondering why you always have me sit to your right. So that explains
No, I
why.
just want you close to me, Mark.
I think those are great points. I've often done the position the map towards the people who I'm teaching the game to, and also the take the first turn. I think those are two great tips. And also to what Neil was talking about, I love rule books that are, in addition to the FFG leader games model, even without the secondary example play rule book, one company whose rule books I always enjoy are the What's Your Game games. I find the rule books like to be very bright, very colorful. The print is large. It's like very easy to read, very accessible. And the game is taught in the rulebook in such a way that it's the way you would teach it to a new player. That's one thing that I love when a rulebook does, is explains the game in a way that naturally lends itself to teaching it to a new player, where you can read the rules in a way that you can teach it, but then also as you're literally teaching the game, you can follow along in the rulebook to make sure you hit on all your points, and just everything's very clear and very in order.
And then I would say build on concepts. So if you're onboarding newer gamers, and I will forever not have a gateway because all drugs come from marijuana, kids. If you play a deck building game, you can build on the foundation of deck building games and then play Tyrants of the Underdark next, where you are combining deck building and area control. I think that the shared language and infrastructure of many games helps, and you want to avoid your Android netrunners with your grips and suitcases and whatever other dumbass terms that game decides to use for everything. But I think like a shared language for a new player, they will learn and grow with that, which is like, what does it mean to have a worker placement spot and to have that be blocked? And that becomes second nature by the fifth game, and really speaks to the deeper you get in the hobby, the more you can half read the rule book or just go, okay, I see exactly what's happening here.
Yeah, we often have this conversation a lot in video game land. I'm glad you brought this up because it's actually a point I had myself, which is that it's easy to take for granted like how much shared knowledge we've accumulated just by having done this for X number of years. And when you don't have any of that, everything feels like a struggle to learn, like the basic concept of worker placement. And I was thinking about this just a lot in the context of when I went to South Africa over the holidays. I ended up taking a lot of games with me, like more than I should have, to be perfectly honest. But what that kind of afforded me was the chance to always have a game that I felt was the next best game to play. And the reason that this came up is because I'd mentioned this previously. I stumbled into teaching my mother a game of the Siege of Runedar, which is a deck builder game. So then the immediate thought is like, oh, what's another deck builder that just builds up on these things? And thankfully, there was paperback in my bag. And like, it's so easy to then start that rules explanation with, okay, do you remember how this worked in Runedar? This is the same kind of structure that's called deck building, and you're going to cycle through this hand, and etc., etc. And then you can start to layer the rules that are unique to paperback, which is a pretty different game from Siege of Runedar. But starting from a core, leading in with that like familiarity does a lot to ease a player's mind. Just being like, oh, wait, no, I get this because we did this in the other game. And that's one of the things I can't stress enough is starting with the familiar and then getting to the unfamiliar is a really good way to get someone engaged right off the bat.
And I think the terminology, too, don't assume that they know the terminology. You know, if I don't go home to my house after about a month, I will get a call from my father, and he'll say, Callan, I have a question for you. I'll be like, okay, Dad, what? And he's like, what does area majority mean? And he'll be like, you guys are speaking a different language on this podcast. I like it, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And he's often, what's an auction game? Like, what do you mean when you say deck building? And so even those terms feel super basic, but you can get lost in it. And I often just assume that everyone at the table will know all of them when that's probably unfair in the interest of approachability.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I was just teaching my girlfriend, I think it was Kitchen Rush, and she was asking me what type of game it was. And I was about to say, oh, it's got some worker placement. And then it struck me like that is such a foreign concept to somebody who is not entrenched in the hobby. It would be such a throwaway term to my board gaming friends. But as it was leaving my lips, it just like, this is really a foreign term. It's not going to convey, I guess maybe the term placement conveys something, but it doesn't have the weight with a non-gamer as it would with a gamer. And it's just important to realize that as you're teaching the games, like this shorthand that you have for a lot of your friends in the hobby doesn't work at all and can get in the way if you assume it has meaning that it doesn't for people who are unfamiliar.
And I would be remiss not to mention approachability as it relates to color blindness. So this is something that I did not even know I suffered from in any way until I started playing board games. And I was convinced that there was just bad lighting in every house that I was going into. I actually have a very mild form of color blindness, which I believe is called tritanopia or a tritanopia, which is specifically related to blue-yellow color blindness. And so I have trouble distinguishing some yellows and some blues and greens end up all smearing together, which means I am often asking Neelan or Mark or Christina to clarify piece colors to me. And I think many games are doing a very good job of adding symbols and iconography to every different color. I think the last game, and I hate to call it out because I liked it, was Enchanted Plumes, which I believe had 10 shades of colors, and it was just like, I don't even know what that is. And I'm still convinced, and I think this is probably my own pride, that if I got my lighting set up right, that I could perceive all of the colors and it wouldn't be an issue. But even that is another way in which that I engage too. If there's 4 color choices in a 3-player game and one of them is white and one of them is yellow, I just put away one of those 2 colors immediately. Like, it's not even an option for me in that 3-player game. So I think that publishers are getting better at that, but it is something to consider as you're even picking player colors for you yourself, or as a publisher is trying to figure out what color they should make their games.
I think that's going to do it for our talk on approachability and accessibility in board games. Thank you all so much for listening to another episode of the show. As always, you can find us on all of our social media, whether that's on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can just search for those to find the appropriate pages, or you can head to our Discord channel that is at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord, where you can hang out and talk to us about board games, your thoughts on the current episode, and anything else that you just want to hang and chat about. As a reminder, please send your feedback to us for you to drive the future direction of the show at boardgamebarrage.com/feedback in order to stand a chance to get some cool board games. Thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro music. What's on your mind, kid? Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. 213-310-714-818.
Number 1, you recorded the episode last week and thought, wow, this is so much harder without him.
That's true.
That's what I thought, Mark.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case.
Look, I got a ring, Mark, and it says, have a good time on it. So dumb. I was choosing between silver and gold.
Right.
And it's all in Japanese, and I'm doing like the yen conversion.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, gold looks really good. And then I realized that the price, it was actually actual gold. So the gold one was like over $1,000.
Oh, okay.
And the silver one was like 1/10.
Yeah.
It was, I almost clicked purchase, but my God, I would have been like really upset on my credit card to accidentally have spent $1,000 worth of yen.
Right.
Very dumb. Okay, so we are recording locally.